Hello everyone. When I look at the relationships between pilots and flight crews, I'm often reminded of the relationships between members of a band. The singer is usually an egotistical cunt, from whom the guitarist jealously snatches every opportunity to steal the limelight. The bass player is just glad to have pussy to eat, even if it does taste of roadie spunk. And finally you have the drummer, who's the only one who's correct in thinking he's special, and that's only because they're always severely retarded. With the relationship analogies out of the way, let's get on with curious aviation tales. This one is dedicated to flight crews. Before we begin, I would like to say a very special thank you to Audun Dragland. Audun has very kindly provided me with most of today's stories. He's also a private pilot, long-time subscriber and all-round cool guy. Our first story begins at Sola Airport in Norway on the afternoon of Thursday the 13th of September 1956. On the afternoon in question, the Norwegian Air Force 718th Training Squadron were busily training a batch of student pilots. In the midst of the busy schedule, the officer in charge of the tower, Arne Helvik, noticed nothing unusual when the pilot of a Lockheed T-33 trainer aircraft requested permission to runway. The pilot had used the correct procedures and call signs and had done absolutely nothing to arouse suspicion. The pilot was given permission to take off and a report on the wind direction and speed. He promptly took off, and that's where the story should have ended. Unknown to flight leader Helvik, a massive shitstorm was gathering speed off the end of runway 18. You see, the T-bird to which he had just given clearance had neither pilot nor student pilot on board. The sole occupant on board was flight mechanic Arne Storley. He had just turned 21 the day before and thought a fitting gift to himself would be a flight in a T-bird. Growing up near Sola Air Base since childhood, Sergeant Stoley had harboured a deep-seated ambition to become a fighter pilot. He had applied several times for flight school, however he was never even called for selection tests. Like a virtuoso guitarist playing a blistering solo, thus cock-blocking his singer for the rest of the evening, Sergeant Storley decided this was going to be his day. He was going to show everyone what he was capable of. Back in the tower, the phone rings and flight leader Helvik is informed that a plane has just been stolen by a mechanic. To make matters worse, the area around Sola Airport is fairly densely populated, and it soon becomes clear to all that Sergeant Storley is by no means a natural pilot. Pretty quickly a team was formed comprising of both instructors in the tower and in the air, with the sole task of bringing Sergeant Storley back to Earth safely. Eventually, through the persistence and guidance of the training officers present, Storley felt confident enough to attempt a landing. His first landing attempt was too fast and at too steep an angle. As a result, he bounced off the runway and had to go around. The second attempt was too low and too fast. Although he bounced and ran out of runway on his third attempt, the aircraft eventually came to a stop after crossing a road. The aircraft was deemed a write-off, however Sergeant Storley emerged unscathed, with the exception of the damage to his reputation and career. He was sentenced to 120 days imprisonment and fined 47,000 kroner, which is the equivalent of about €68,000 today. On appeal, the imprisonment part of his sentence was commuted. He died in 2004 at the age of 69. Arne Helvik, the officer in charge in the tower, is still living in Norway and is 92 years old. Our next tale charts the progress of a pilfering private who decided to borrow a Huey from the US Army. Private First Class Robert Preston had been washed out of Army Flight School in 1973. Although he had a private fixed-wing licence, he had failed the instrumentation module of the Army Rotary Wing course. On February 17, 1974, he jumped into a UH-1 Huey in Fort Meade, Maryland, started her up and fucked off. If stealing a Huey isn't quite bizarre enough for you, what happens next is just totally fucking hatstand. His first stop was at a trailer park, probably for a quick $5 Hummer from your mum. He then made his way to Washington, where he buzzed around some of the monuments, earning the begrudging respect of the police pilots chasing him. He then landed in the grounds of the White House, where Secret Service agents fed him some buckshot until he surrendered. He was fined $2,400 and sentenced to 1 year in prison. Our last tale took place on September 15, 1988, during a joint exercise between the Belgian and Norwegian Air Forces. Details are quite sketchy, but here's what we know. At a time when most of the aircraft were left unattended, a 28-year-old member of the Belgian ground crew jumped into an F-16 and took off. The reasons behind this action are unknown, and I can't even find the name of the crew member involved. All we do know for sure is the airframe number, date, location, and duration of the flight. The flight lasted a total of 2 minutes and 5 seconds, ending in 2 tragedies. The first tragedy was the loss of a beautiful airframe. The second was for the Norwegian farmer whose home was burned down. The silver lining, of course, was that an oxygen thief had purified the human gene pool by removing himself from it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to dislike or tell me to go fuck myself below.